Chapter 2: A Beginner Survivor with Nothing. After a brief check, John Smith carefully installed the upgraded 3 mechanical arms onto the robot leaning against the garage wall. The robot had no head, just a torso and legs crudely assembled from metal frames and steel plates. Calling it a robot was generous. It was more like a rough, makeshift model. After attaching the heavy mechanical arms, it looked even more fragile, as if a gentle poke would be enough to topple it. "It'll have to do," John muttered to himself. Seeing that the robot hadn't fallen apart, he was actually quite satisfied. After all, to save resources, and since parts like these were no longer available, he had handcrafted this model bit by bit over the last few days, and there was no real hope for its quality. Shoddy engineering robot, compatibility 37%. Evaluation: this is a stationary model that, despite having functional mechanical arms, is still incapable of performing any engineering tasks. Upgrade path: general lightweight engineering robot, 15 survival points. A compatibility of only 37% was far from satisfactory. However, everything was relative. Before installing the upgraded mechanical arms, the robot's compatibility had been just 1%, a 36-point increase. The survival points needed for an upgrade had once been a daunting triple-digit figure, but now it had dropped to just 15 points, which was quite an impressive achievement. This clearly showed that John's decision to upgrade the mechanical arms first to increase compatibility was the right one. Still, 15 survival points were a bit much for John. Focusing his attention, John concentrated on the compatibility line, and more detailed information immediately appeared on the screen. 100 kilograms of materials were missing. That wasn't a big problem. For John, who had a few $100s of budget and had spent half a month collecting junk, common raw materials were the least of his worries. He went out into the yard, picking through the scraps for a while, and returned with a cart full of old steel bars, wires, and a few circuit boards, piling them beside the robot. This time, the compatibility rose to 56%. The survival points required for the upgrade dropped by 3 points. John knew this was the best he could save for now. Without further hesitation, he initiated the upgrade process for the robot. After a flash of light, the materials and the model piled on the ground all disappeared. In their place stood a 2-meter-tall engineering robot, covered in sleek silver metal and equipped with 3 precise mechanical arms, exuding a sense of advanced technology. Fabricate an MB3-type screw from available materials. John tried issuing a command. Within seconds, a standard screw began to take shape. Watching the engineering robot's fluid operation, John nodded in satisfaction. Quite impressive. As long as efficiency and material quality weren't a concern, this robot could produce most industrial components and handle welding and assembly work. It was effectively a combination of a lathe and an assembly workshop. "Finally, I can take it easy," John sighed. "No more manual labor for me." Remembering the painful experience of manually assembling the crude robot model just days ago, John still felt an ache in his fingers. For someone who wasn't good at handiwork, even putting together a simple robot model was a monumental task. It was something he definitely didn't want to go through again. Having tested the robot's functions and confirmed they met expectations, John eagerly opened his laptop, pulling up a design plan for a drilling rig and geothermal generator that he'd prepared earlier. These were the next pieces of equipment he needed to construct. To truly start building a shelter, he needed a stable and sufficient power supply. Relying on external power sources was simply not reliable enough. Half a month ago, the federal government had imposed strict restrictions on both residential and commercial electricity. Residential power was rationed. Each household's monthly quota wasn't enough to run an air conditioner continuously. Commercial power wasn't limited, but the cost had skyrocketed tenfold, and the requirements to qualify for it were very high. With John's current circumstances, there was no way he could get approved. Generating his own power seemed the only way forward. Diesel generators were the cheapest option, but both diesel and gasoline were now regulated commodities. Private individuals couldn't purchase them independently, and even refueling a car was restricted. Each vehicle, with the same driver's license, could only be filled twice a month, if not officially registered. That wasn't nearly enough to cover regular travel, let alone generate power. Wind, hydro, and solar power either required massive investments or had limited output, and none were particularly stable in a post-apocalyptic environment. After considering all the options, John concluded that a geothermal generator was the most feasible choice. But again, due to material restrictions, buying a geothermal generator, even with money, was impossible. Drilling rigs were available, but their prices had soared to hundreds of times their normal rate. All the money John had wouldn't even buy him a drill head. The only viable solution was to build one himself. That's why John had been working so hard, waiting until now to finally start building. Without an engineering robot that could replace lathes and processing equipment, everything was just wishful thinking. He transferred the design plans to the robot and sent it out to work in the yard. John adjusted himself into a comfortable position, leaning back in his chair, watching the progress bar on his laptop screen as the robot transmitted updates heading to the worksite. Cutting materials, a deep sense of comfort and ease washed over him. Since learning from the apocalypse survival system half a month ago that the end was near, John had been taking things step by step to get to where he was now. Every moment had been filled with anxiety as he scouted for suitable shelter locations, gathered materials, and made connections for building the shelter. Every second felt like an ordeal, fearing that one mistake would lead to wasted time and ultimate failure. But now, with the appearance of the first fully automated engineering robot, that sense of urgency finally dissipated. The engineering robot's professional capabilities and efficiency were far beyond what an ordinary person could achieve. Even during the dead of night, while John slept, the robot worked tirelessly, without rest or concern for unexpected issues. With enough materials and a robotic assistant, John thought, it's like entering the fast lane. The shelter will definitely be built smoothly. If something goes wrong, at least it won't be my fault. Freed from constant labor and anxiety, John finally had time to think about the future. He didn't know much about the specifics of the apocalypse, only that it was somehow related to extreme climate events. It could be extreme heat or cold, a virus outbreak, radiation, or earthquakes and floods. Whatever the disaster, its goal seemed to be to wipe out all surface life on Earth. Underestimating it would mean being reduced to ashes under the power of these cataclysms. As for when the end would come, John only knew it would be within 6 months. Whether it was exactly 6 months, a month, or just a few weeks away, he had no way of knowing. The uncertainty about the timing had been a constant source of pressure for John. It wasn't until now, when he no longer had to do all the work himself, that he began to feel a bit of relief. Otherwise, his body might have given out under the stress and anxiety before the actual disaster even hit. The government must have some information about the apocalypse, John mused. They might even know more than I do. Otherwise, why would they impose such strict material controls? Even buying extra sugar and rice requires signing a guarantee. John recalled his initial attempts at stockpiling supplies, which involved failed online orders and raiding local supermarkets and grocery stores for essential goods. He hadn't expected that buying more than 44 pounds of sugar and 12 bags of rice would bring the local authorities to his door. His face darkened at the memory. It's like they're making it impossible for regular people to survive. Even if someone got an early warning and wanted to stockpile supplies, there's only so much they could gather. Rice isn't a big deal. Minus 12 bags weighing 240 pounds will last a long time, John thought. Once the shelter's hydroponic farm is up and running, we'll have plenty. But sugar is trickier. It's useful for many things in a post-apocalyptic world. I'll need to find a way to get more. John had already started working on this. Although sugar required ID registration for purchase, most people didn't need much. Hiring a few people to buy in batches and flipping it through intermediaries could easily net him a few £100s. Plus, sugar-rich items weren't limited to just pure sugar. Sweeping up unsold candies wouldn't draw much attention. Besides sugar, items like salt, vitamin tablets, common medicinal chemicals, alcohol, tobacco, and spices would also be highly valuable commodities in the future. These items were slightly less regulated, but their prices were still high. Limited by his budget, John could only buy so much. However, to meet his own needs and handle minimal trade, it was more than enough. After considering his own shelter's needs, John couldn't help but sigh. The authorities have restricted so many resources. I hope their shelters are adequately prepared. Otherwise, who knows how many people will die when the time comes. John wasn't the type to be overly sympathetic, but imagining the possibility of being the last person alive in a world devoid of others was far from appealing. Humans were social creatures, and the need for companionship was almost as important as physical sustenance. Night gradually fell over the deserted countryside farmhouse. Apart from the noise generated by the engineering robot at work, everything was calm and peaceful. On John's system panel, a series of new messages silently refreshed. Survival point settlement for today. Successfully survived 1 day, 1 survival point. Successfully constructed a general lightweight engineering robot. Slightly increased survival capability, 2 survival points. Acquired first fully automated tool. Advanced from the manual era to the mechanical processing era. Greatly increased survival odds, 75 survival points. Current survival points, 78. 75 points. John's eyebrow twitched. For a moment, he doubted whether he was seeing things correctly. Despite having previously guessed that he might receive a substantial reward based on his research of the apocalypse system's rules, receiving 75 points at once was beyond his expectations. Prior to this, his daily survival point income had been just 1 point. Looks like I underestimated the importance of the engineering robot, John thought. After his initial shock, he couldn't help but feel a sense of relief and pride in his decision to prioritize the construction of the engineering robot. With this unexpected windfall, the progress of building the shelter would undoubtedly accelerate. A brighter future was within reach. The night passed without incident. The next day at noon, after over 20 hours of work, a small drilling rig and a geothermal generator took shape under the engineering robot's meticulous craftsmanship. John approached to inspect them and found that, visually, they almost perfectly matched the design plans. They were as well made as if they had come straight off an assembly line. Incomplete drilling rig, compatibility 86%. Evaluation missing some core components. This drilling rig cannot operate properly. Upgrade path. Small drilling rig 1 km range, 3 survival points. Large drilling rig 5 km range, 20 survival points. Extreme drilling rig 10 km range, 60 survival points. Unfinished geothermal generator compatibility 76%. Evaluation, a partially completed generator, many critical components, not much different from a model. Upgrade path. Small geothermal generator 300 kWh, 13 survival points. Both pieces of equipment were either incomplete or unfinished, unable to function properly. This was no surprise since it was John's deliberate choice. Although the engineering robot could theoretically create most components, the time required wasn't guaranteed. The more intricate the part, the longer it took. If John pursued perfection, it would take at least 10 days or half a month to complete both the drilling rig and the geothermal generator. By that time, the apocalypse might already be here. Instead of waiting, it was better to produce semi-finished products and use survival points to fill in the gaps. And this approach saved time and significantly reduced survival point expenditure. It was the most cost-effective choice. After searching through related information, John hesitated for a while before gritting his teeth and choosing to upgrade to the 10 km extreme drilling rig. This wasn't an extravagant decision. He had no other choice. The area around Riverdale, in the heart of the continent, lacked volcanoes and hot springs, meaning it wasn't a traditional geothermal resource zone. To get a geothermal generator working, he had to dig deep into the Earth's crust. Such an enormous project was beyond the capabilities of an ordinary drilling rig. "I hope this will be enough," John murmured, feeling a pang of regret as he spent a large number of survival points. We knew, however, that this was a necessary step. Power was the foundation of construction and survival. Without electricity, everything else would just be an illusion. The upgraded 10 km extreme drilling rig, when compacted, was about the size of a bus. When fully extended, it could cover almost half a football field. It was a true behemoth. Thankfully, its automation level was high. It even had wheels and some power of its own. With minimal effort, John managed to get it started. However, lacking experience in such work, John's initial operation was clumsy and awkward once the drilling rig began digging. It took until late the next day, after more than 20 hours of work, with breaks in between, before he finally managed to drill nearly 9 kilometers deep. The data coming from the end probe indicated that the location was sufficient to get the geothermal generator operational. John decided not to push for the full 10 kilometers and called it a day, turning his focus to installing the geothermal generator instead. The geothermal generator, upgraded for 13 survival points, performed even better than the original design specs. It was essentially at the cutting edge of current technology, with user-friendly interfaces that made installation much easier for John. 2 hours later, a row of green indicator lights lit up on the geothermal generator. John's own power plant had officially started running. "Not bad," he said. "The power output has reached the rated value -400 quo. I won't have to worry about electricity for a long time." Watching the real-time power output on the generator's small display, John's exhaustion from the long hours of work disappeared, replaced by a deep sense of satisfaction. What did 400 kW per hour mean? It was equivalent to the output of a small hydroelectric plant, with an investment of around $20 million. It could power 10,000 household light bulbs simultaneously, enough to light up half a small town at night. With this generator, John felt like he now held an unlimited future in his hands.